Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, May 15th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Dennis Lewycky on the magnificent fight celebrating the Winnipeg general strike, which took place this day 100 years ago. Also on the program today, Alabama passes a total ban on abortion as a means to test Roe v. Wade. And the U.S. State Department evacuates all non-emergency personnel from our Iraqi embassy, supposedly over fears of an Iranian attack. Convenient. Meanwhile, out of the deep concern we have for what's going on in the Middle East, the U.S. has all but shut the door completely and totally on Syrian war refugees. And federal court, Trump's bid to stop the financial records subpoena from Congress looks like it is failing. Elizabeth Warren says no thanks to Fox. And Joe Biden says the Republican fever just needs a little bit of aspirin and everything will be fine. 16 million voters were removed from the voter rolls in the run-up to 2016. Donald Trump Jr. will provide limited testimony to the Senate Intel Committee as per a recently negotiated deal. And in Florida, you'll have multiple radio stations that will be playing a never-ending loop of Trump speeches over the next 16 months. All that and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. We threatened to do it. We claimed we would do it, and we're going to be doing it. We're actually not just acknowledging the Winnipeg general strike from 1919, specifically.
Oh, Canada.
Yes. But we're going to be talking today to the author of The Magnificent Fight on how that strike came about, its lessons that we can apply today. Important to have a sense of these things when opportunity strikes, no pun intended, in the near future, maybe in the distant future, who knows. Meanwhile, the 2020 elections are happening. Joe Biden is up in New Hampshire. And it's interesting, in this office, there has been a slight role reversal. Whereas I, for an extended period of time, of course, have been on my blame the voters bailiwick for several years now. there are others in this office who have been on the other side of that. And now it feels a little bit like things have reversed.
I think I've charted a third way the whole time between your complete discrediting of the people and Jamie's blind faith in them.
What has yours been?
It's that I both respect and disrespect the electorate simultaneously in a way that synthesizes the contradictions in a way that's convenient depending on the argument I'm making at a particular time.
Dialectics, Bill.
I will say that you have mastered that ability.
It's an ability called synthesis. You're too blindly ideologically committed to your resentments and emotional agita and Jamie's utopian visions. Ask me today, is there a poll that's bad for Bernie? The electorate's looking very bad. However, I have confidence in them in the long term, potentially.
That is what I've been saying about Joe Biden. My confidence in the electorate is rather limited. However, I do think, and look, I'm not even saying this from an ideological perspective. I mean, I feel like I have a decent understanding of partisan Democrats. And I just think that those partisan Democrats have a little more savvy than they used to, and have a little less patience than they used to, a little less desire for compromise. I don't know that the West Wing could succeed today in today's environment, the TV show. But here is Joe Biden saying something that I think many of you will find, in some ways, incredibly stunning, because you are all aware of what has taken place over the past 3 years. And you are aware of what took place in the 8 years during the Obama-Biden administration, and also are aware of what happened from 2000 to 2008 during the George W. Bush administration, and so on and so on. This is such a shocking thing to hear. We will talk about the potential explanations for this, which range from medical conditions to deep cynicism. But here is Joe Biden at a place apparently that serves yogurt in New Hampshire, by a yogurt sign, answering a question, suggesting that all you need to do is get rid of Donald Trump, and then magic happens, and Republicans turn okay. Here
He's like the Night King.
I just think there is a way, and the thing will fundamentally change things, is with Donald Trump out of the White House. Not a joke. You will see an epiphany occur among many of my Republican friends. And it's already beginning this year in the House now. You've seen people that, in fact, were not willing to vote for any Democratic initiative, even if they agreed with it, because they didn't want to be the odd person out if it wasn't going to pass. There's no sense in getting politically beaten for something that's not going to happen. Let me put it another way. If we can't change it, we're in trouble. This nation cannot function without generating consensus.
Okay, so there's two parts to this. The first part is Joe Biden claims that the Republicans are going to have an epiphany if Donald Trump gets out of office. If this sounds remarkably similar to the idea, let's say, that their fever will break, that makes sense, because that's exactly what Obama said about the Republican fever breaking. He said this back in 2012, right before his reelection. He argued, my expectation is if we can break this fever, we can invest in clean energy and efficiency because it's not a partisan issue. He says that if he expects the gridlock to end after the election, if he can win the election, because then that after the election, now it turns out that the goal of beating Obama doesn't make much sense because I'm not running again, we can start getting some cooperation again. Now, maybe Joe Biden was asleep during those years, or as Paul Waldman writes in the Washington Post, maybe there's some type of blow to the head that took place. In fact, he writes, if Biden thinks it is, he says, though this is something all of us would like to believe is true, it just isn't. And if Biden thinks it is, we should check to see if he recently suffered some kind of blow to the head. And then he goes on to say, it's possible, of course, that Biden doesn't actually think that Republicans will be joining him in a spirit of openness and compromise. He may know what the reality is, but also believe that it's worthwhile to at least pretend some other future might be possible. And Waldman goes on to say, the only problem with that is there's no evidence. There's much to be gained from being seen as reasonable and moderate. Voters don't reward you for it. It doesn't get you any closer to achieving your policy goals. So what's the point? So either we have someone who is deluded or just posing in a really, really unhelpful way. Because I actually think it's not just what's the point. There's great detriment here. Because if Joe Biden is setting up this basically built-in excuse for the Republicans and why they are following Donald Trump in lockstep, how do you explain what happened in Alabama yesterday? How do you explain what Mitch McConnell has been doing for years? How do you explain the empty seat? How do you explain Mitch McConnell going on and saying, the best part of my career was looking Barack Obama in the eye and saying, you will not get that empty Supreme Court seat? This is really stunning, and it is my contention that the Democratic primary voters, this may have worked 10 years ago, but I just don't, I find it very, very hard to believe that this is going to work with people today. How much delusion do you need about the Republican Party? And if he does believe this, like I say, if he doesn't believe it, he's just piss poor at trying to set up a political context in which he can get anything done. Right? Because, I mean, if you're just saying Republicans are fundamentally reasonable, they're just under the throes, the hypnosis of Donald Trump. And this is your political strategy. What happens when they say no to you as president? When you have already basically given them the imprimatur of being reasonable? Well, then I guess it's reasonable to deny you any Supreme Court picks. I guess it's reasonable to deny you any to sign off on your hearings for to staff your administration. I guess it's reasonable to not allow you to have any federal court picks. I mean, this is what he's doing is extremely dangerous. And that's assuming he thinks he knows what he's doing. He may also just believe this stuff. He may be so insulated from what's going on that he believes this stuff, which is even scarier. But I will remind you that when Barack Obama made that deal that extended the Bush tax cuts, when they capitulated to the Republicans, when they did not need to do any of it, you all remember the fiscal cliff. Well, there was no fiscal cliff. Those Bush tax cuts did not need to be negotiated because they had a sunset provision. They were going to go away on their own. And there was one person in the government who understood that, and it was Harry Reid, which is why he was so angry when Joe Biden essentially slid back into the Senate and made a side deal with Mitch McConnell to say, we're going to give you some of the, you keep the Bush tax cuts, and we will get what we would get anyways. Joe Biden, and you can see it in the second part of what he says, which is, if we can't do this, the country is in real trouble. Well, we haven't been doing it for years and years. There's a reason why Barack Obama, the best things that he did and the things that were so easily unwound were because they were all by executive action. And the reason why they were all by executive action is because we're already there. We've been there. So the question is, how do you respond to it? Do you continue to go back to the Republicans and expect them to be moderate when they haven't been and they have been successful in not being so? Or do you make them pay a price? And he is basically saying there's no price to be paid. I understand you just were under the hypnosis of Donald Trump. I mean, this is just absurd, and it is dangerous. And it is particularly dangerous at a time now where that judiciary, all of that scheming by Mitch McConnell has paid off. And Joe Biden is just basically saying, you're going to get a free pass, a free political pass. And what's going to happen is, if he becomes president, they're going to take that pass and they're going to slam him over the head with it. He's going to find out it's a club. Really stupid. And frankly, I think Democratic voters are just going to be like, what Republican Party are you talking about? This is something that makes Joe Biden look incredibly out of touch.
Delusional.
Yeah, I hope that you're right. I mean, it is a nice bedtime story, right? Like, Trump is the Night King, and as soon as you kill him, his army of ghouls is just going to fall on the ground and play dead.
Exactly.
We'll see. I mean, we'll see if people are dumb enough to buy it. I feel like I have to defend myself for a second, though. I did not say that I do blame the electorate. I said if I were the type of person to blame the electorate, it
sounds like you're learning.
Yeah, there you go.
And yes, I would say that if you vote for Joe Biden in the 2020 primary, you deserve President Andrew Dice Clay in 2024.
There you go.
I like the use of the word if.
Yes. Everything is hypothetical. This is not hypothetical. JustCoffee.coop offers you 10% off with the coupon code MAJORITY. They are a fair trade. Not only do they give a fair rate to their farms, they don't abandon their farms. I had a chance to go out to Wisconsin a couple of months ago. I spoke to the folks there. When their farms have problems, they stand by them. Other roasters, whatnot, they will abandon the farm because they know they can go to the next one and get the coffee that they need. These guys stay with these farms. I mean, even if their coffee did not taste great, even if they didn't have multiple types of roasts and types of coffee, even if they didn't offer a Majority Report blend, ladies and gentlemen, this would be the place to buy your coffee. But all of what I just said was true. So justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Get 10% off your order. It's always free shipping. And also, don't forget, you can support this program by becoming a member. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com. And we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be talking about the magnificent fight, the 1919 Winnipeg general strike with Dennis Lewycky. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, Dennis Lewycky, who has been involved in managing and facilitating social justice and development for almost 45 years. Works with community groups, government agencies to address issues of poverty, homelessness, and discrimination. And author of Magnificent Fight, the Winnipeg General Strike. Dennis, welcome to the program.
Good to hear from you.
All right. So we are, today's the 100th anniversary. Is that correct?
Absolutely. May 15th, 1919, all the action started.
All right. Well, I mean, let's just start just briefly, and I want to circle back to this and tease it out more. But briefly, why is it important for us to remember this strike?
You know, I'm not a historian. I'm a journalist by training and activist by inclination. But I think that what history gives us is it's a prism through which we can see ourselves today. And the 1919 strike was a struggle for social justice, for human rights. So by looking back at it, I think we can see some of the dynamics in our own society, our own time, and how we're relating to them. So I think it's a useful tool. Of course, it's not a blueprint. We don't get a blueprint from history, but it helps us understand, and especially when we're doing anything that requires collective thinking. You know, it helps a group. For example, I do a lot of work with young people, high school students, and it doesn't take them long to draw the links between the past and the present, and then the discussions about the present. And I think that's where history, and especially the strike in our case, is really dynamic. It's a great resource.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, just so that folks get a sense of Winnipeg. It is a city now, I'd say probably about the size of like a Seattle.
About a million. About a million population now.
A million. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. And so tell us a little bit about what Winnipeg was like 100 years ago.
Winnipeg, at one point, was the third biggest city in Canada. And actually, it was called the Chicago of the North because of the amount of grain that was traded through the grain exchange. So between 1900 and 1920, it was a booming place. I mean, the population grew from 40,000 in 1900 to almost 180,000 20 years later. And it was a real agricultural and industrial center. 3 railroads converged here. There were 13 banks, the grain exchange, the industries, metalworking industries, huge steel production for the construction of big buildings. At one time, there were 13 what people call skyscrapers at the time, and one of them that was built in 1906 was considered the tallest building in the British Empire. So these are just indicators of an economy that was really, really growing fast and really involving a lot of new people. So a lot of those thousands of growth, they were immigrants. They were people coming from Britain, the United Kingdom, and Eastern Europe to work in the industries or to work in agriculture. So there was a huge influx of immigrants that really was changing not only the economic and labor relations situation, but was really affecting the cultural character of the time. So it was really a dynamic time. For most, it was an exciting time. For some, it was bringing about change that was a threat. So it was good in many ways, but it also created stresses and strains on the society at the time.
Okay, and so you mentioned that it was renowned for having a skyscraper, and
Yes.
the strikes started, at least in part, with some of those construction workers. Tell us
Good point.
what led up to the strike.
Well, there were 2 real key groups at the time that were negotiating for better wages and reduced working hours. And that was people working in the construction trades, electricians, carpenters, that kind of skilled tradesmen. And then on the other side, there were the metal trades workers, tinsmiths, boilermakers. These two groups were negotiating with their employers at the time, and mainly it was around wages. But if you remember, at that time, it was 8 to 10 hour days and 6-day weeks. It was, nothing like we have today. So they were always trying to negotiate better working conditions and benefits for workers. The employers were very resistant to that. And at that time, remember that the unions were not formally or legally recognized. So it was a very informal relationship between the unions and the employers. So on one hand, for example, in the construction trades, the contractors, the big construction companies that were building those buildings, they knew that they had to pay more. They agreed that workers were not getting paid much. There was a time when, during the First World War, when wages were in effect frozen as part of the national response to the war effort. So the employers in some cases knew there had to be improvements and increased wages, but there were disagreements over how much and when to apply these changes. So it was like I say, a dynamic time, lots of construction, lots of work being done, but it was a situation where the workers were expecting more out of their labor at the time.
All right, and so give us a sense of. I mean, it's interesting. So the dynamic, from almost a generic sense, is a situation where the workers are aware of just how much those owning these companies and presumably the growth of who are benefiting, the capitalists who are benefiting from the growth of the city, and this is building resentment. Walk us through how, who went on strike first, how this thing spread. But I'm also curious at this point, because in the States at this time, particularly 1919 in many respects, and certainly in 1920, there's a lot of rather, famous, like Matewan was in the States. I think it was maybe 1920. There was a lot of striking that was going around, particularly through the 19 teens, or at least in the earlier part. So how much were the unions in Canada? What was their relationship with the unions, or I should say, the workers in the States?
Good. I'm glad you brought that up, because prior to the strike, there was a lot of labor action in the States and in Europe. This was a global phenomenon where unions were organizing. In the 1880s and 1890s, a lot of the workers were organizing into unions, both in Canada and the United States. So they were really developing and testing their union muscle at the time. And there was resistance, obviously, from employers. They wanted to control wages and control workers. So it was a time when there were thousands of strikes. Even in Europe, going back to like 1906, 1907, Belgium, Spain, there were major strikes. The Russians, before they took power in 1917, they were using general strikes as a way of putting pressure on the government at the time. So, it was a pretty universal phenomenon. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned, Seattle in January of 1919 had a huge strike. 65,000 workers went off for a week. And it, in many ways, was a template for what happened here in Winnipeg. So just to respond to your question about how it all got launched here, the metal trades and the construction trades workers were negotiating in March and April, not getting very far. So both of those went on strike on May 1st and May 2nd of 1919. That really was the catalyst. There was a strike. They were pushing for wages and reduced hours. They went on strike. That then got the Winnipeg Trades and Labor Council, which represented other unions in the city, to then call for a vote on whether or not they would support those workers on strike. Well, the response was overwhelming. 11,000 or around 8,000 members voted to go on a general strike. Only about 600 voted not to go on a general strike. So right from the beginning, you can see there was a lot of union solidarity and common interest, of course, at the time. That then brought out roughly another 12,000 workers or 18,000 workers. And as I said earlier, a population of about 180,000. So you had 10% of the population on strike on May the 15th, 1919, 100 years ago today. The other interesting fact or phenomenon was that within a few days, another 12,000 workers who were not unionized went on strike. They were immigrants largely working in small businesses, some of them domestic servants, for example, in the homes of the city's rich, and they basically walked off their jobs as well. So that surprised everyone, but what it meant was that there was now 30,000 workers on strike in a city of 180,000. And just to add to another dimension, so we're talking numbers, the veterans who were coming back to Canada from the First World War, a lot of them saw common cause with the strikers. I mean, they wanted jobs, they wanted to be treated fairly. They had just sacrificed a lot in the name of democracy, and they really wanted to enjoy the fruits of that democracy. So about another 4,000 or 5,000 veterans got involved. So within a few days after May 15th, there was almost 35,000 workers on strike, and they carried through that labor action for 6 weeks.
And so you're talking about almost 20% of the population, and I would imagine much higher figure relative to the working age population, right? Because we're yes. I mean, and so that has devastating effects. I'm curious about this dynamic before we get to how this ends, and what happens over those 6 weeks. But the idea that you'd have 12,000 non-union workers join the union strikes, the idea that you had 4,000 to 5,000 veterans who are obviously, I would imagine they still have particularly close bonds, particularly at that time, having just come back from the war. So there's a tremendous amount of solidarity amongst the veterans. There is in this country now, and I imagine there's some maybe analog in Canada, although I to be honest with you, I don't know, a movement amongst unions that are trying to turn away from the managerial unionism that has dominated the union movement over the past, 4, 5, 6 decades. And move towards a more of a social justice unionism, which, as in broad swaths, basically means that you, as a union, you don't just fight for your own wages and your own job. You fight for issues. You create solidarity across society by picking up and fighting for the issues that are shared by folks in the working class and shared by folks across, some amount of classes, the non-capitalist class. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And so, how much of what was the consciousness of how the approach was taking at that time? I mean, if the unions were able to mobilize 12,000 non-union workers, which is, more almost the same amount of unionized workers, maybe a little bit less, but in total with the veterans, they were able to mobilize a significant amount of the population. Was that a function just of everyone having a shared resentment, or was there a plan to build cross, intra-union solidarity, or was it because they were immigrants, or what was that?
Well, the there were a number of things, I would say. However, one of the key elements that kind of glued together that class solidarity was a lot of these immigrants came from situations in Europe where they had felt oppression. They were living under draconian regimes, feudal regimes. So they came to Canada with a couple of expectations. One, they were coming to Canada to build a new country, to build a new nation. And it wasn't just their labor, it was their tenacity, their courage, their resilience that they knew they were bringing to Canada. Secondly, a lot of these organizations were very, very independent. These people were very, very independent. So they built their synagogues, they built their labor temples, they built their churches, they set up their community organizations, they started benevolent societies. They were not waiting for government. I mean, there was no expectation that government would provide these services. So there was an ethic right from the beginning of people helping themselves, helping each other. And we can tell many stories of, different ethnic groups that may have been fighting in Europe, but they came to Canada and started working together. There was a collaboration around issues. So I think that was a kind of a seminal part of the changes that were taking place. A lot of the social services prior to the 1920s were provided by church groups or by benevolent groups, many of them middle class, and there was a sense of, that it was important to help one's neighbor, to help the destitute. Remember, there were a lot of widows created from the First World War, and they rarely had a good alternative income. So there were these women and children that needed support. And because we're kind of a smaller country than the States, and our cities were smaller at the time, people knew and could see the conditions that people were living in, and there was that effort to respond. So one of the things that's maybe a little different between Canada and the States is that we've had a bit of that social unionism right from the early 1900s. And so we've pushed through, and whether directly initiated by the unions or initiated by the progressive political parties with the support of the unions, but we've got a lot of the, socialized medicine, improved educational services, unemployment insurance, and things like that, and that we've had for decades here. So it's a little different, but I'm really glad you mentioned this in terms of the unions responding to economic and cultural conditions today, and especially a lot of young people want to get involved in organizing around environmental issues and social issues, confronting racism and things like that. And the unions are responding. They are getting on board and seeing that there is that sense of both obligation and benefit when we all work together around these issues.
So the strike ends 6 weeks later, more or less, at least officially, I guess, on what is known as Bloody Saturday. What happened on that day?
Yeah, that was, it was a constructed, spontaneous conflict. The state, the local elite had been planning and trying to figure out ways of confronting the unions. They were ready for a fight. They had special police hired, ready to intervene. They had military ready, so that when the veterans planned a silent march, a silent demonstration on June the 21st, and it started out very, very peacefully. About 8,000 people congregated in front of City Hall in downtown Winnipeg, but the authorities were not up for tolerating any of that. They charged in with horses and clubs, and at one point they even pulled out the revolvers and killed a couple of men, killed 2 men. So it was a brutal suppression of the workers and of the veterans, and it was, like I say, they were very clear that it had to be a peaceful, violent protest. And they were protesting the arrest of 10 men that had been arrested just a few days earlier, and the raids that took place on 3 of the labor temples. Again, the state had no authority to make these raids and arrests, but they did, and the public was incensed. And so there were demonstrations all across Canada, and the one planned here in Winnipeg on June 21st was to culminate and really express the public's criticism of the government and what they had done with these men and with the labor temples.
And so what happened in the wake of Bloody Saturday?
Well, the workers, I'm sure, not being there, but, from the records we had, the workers were obviously disillusioned by then because it seemed that the strike had become very violent. Throughout these 6 weeks, the unions were constantly saying that the best thing for the workers to do during the strike to win was to do nothing, not confront, not challenge, not demonstrate. So when this happened, it demoralized everyone, and the Central Strike Committee then called an end to the strike for June 25th. Now, in a way, the interesting echo or wave that came out of that, within the next 2 years, a number of very progressive and labor-oriented politicians were elected to office in the city government, the provincial government, and the federal government. And just to give you a snapshot, 3 of the so-called strike leaders that were charged with and convicted of seditious conspiracy, they were in jail in 1920 when they ran for the provincial legislature, and they were elected, overwhelmingly elected, even though they were never allowed out of jail. So, the aftermath really was a vote of the people on the strike, and they voted their support for the strike and the strike leaders.
Wow. And so following that, like, what were then the echoes and the ripples of that strike? Yes. I mean, did we see any type of reforms? I'm curious if there was ever any analogous legislation. And, I'm jumping ahead. Of course, Taft-Hartley happened in this country in the 40s, late 40s. And that ultimately, I think, has really undercut the power of unions. And, I think people are working on trying to figure out ways in which to rebuild that union power. But the worst thing about Taft-Hartley in terms of power is it really prevented general strikes and of this ilk. But was there anything equivalent to that in Canada? And to the extent that there was or wasn't, was there also any other sort of ripple effects of this strike?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, right after the strike in the 1920s, it was a period for the economy where there wasn't the same kind of growth that preceded the 1920s. So that was the first thing. And then by 1929-30, then there was the Depression that put a cap on a lot of economic development and change. So, things that had kind of national dimensions to them that had nothing to do with the strike were really dominant at the time. However, the unions, it was a setback for the unions because workers were disappointed in the failure of the strike. And so there was a time when the unions had to build back their credibility and their strength. But the significant thing, one of the significant things that came out of the strike was that the living conditions that the workers had experienced and were experiencing was really exposed. And in Canada, we have something called royal commissions. That's when a government gets high-powered, credible people to do an investigation, to do an analysis of an important issue. And so in Canada, there was a federal royal commission and then a provincial royal commission to look into what were the underlying causes of the labor unrest and the Winnipeg strike. And both of these clearly pointed out that it was, the workers were frustrated, they were unemployed, they were facing poor working conditions, wages were low. At the same time, there was a wealthy class that was benefiting from the labor of the workers. So these commissions, and these are very, very elite, government-oriented commissions. Both of them were run by judges. both of them came out and basically endorsed what the strikers were fighting for. So that didn't lead to immediate social service development, for example, but it did put in place, and it did show the importance of government and non-governmental agencies working to provide the kind of supports that workers needed, that you can't just expect workers to be slaves. They do have their personal lives. And by the 1940s and 50s, you saw an awareness that when workers are well-clothed, well-fed, educated, it benefits the economy, it benefits industry and business. So, it took time, but the strike and the commissions that came out of that so clearly articulated the living conditions and the exploitation of workers that it did register for the future. I wouldn't say there are direct relations. I'd love to say that something that was done during the strike, led to certain legislation, but there's very few links. I'll give you one example. One of the strike leaders, a guy named J.S. Woodsworth, became quite famous, and he really, really pushed the Canadian government to institute a pension plan for Canadians, which we now have, and it's a fairly healthy plan, and a lot of Canadians rely on it. Well, he was a strike leader. He was in Parliament in the 1920s and 30s, and it took him a long time, and other progressive politicians, but they were able to get something very significant that not only benefited unionists, but benefited everyone in the country, all citizens. So it wasn't direct relationships to what happened after, but you can see that there was that the strike was a catalyst in a way that allowed progressive politicians to then move forward and push for a more progressive agenda.
That, I think, is a huge lesson for folks to take from this story. And I have to say also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say the idea of those elite commissions resolving that the strikers were right sounds about the most Canadian thing I could ever imagine in some way. But Dennis Lewycky, the book is Magnificent Fight, the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Great to meet you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will have fun. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have fun in a myriad of different ways. One of those ways will be to make fun of Dave Rubin again. He had on my old buddy, Mike Cernovich, on.
Boy.
You remember Mike Cernovich. They're just exchanging ideas. You remember Mike Cernovich. He is the guy who is a documented date rape denier. He was also documented a promoter of Pizzagate, which ultimately led to a man going into a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. with a weapon, looking for hidden dungeons where there were pedophile and prostitution rings.
Don't forget, he's an alleged rapist, but he pled it down to battery, so.
That's true. That is also true. There's more, of course. He also was famous for stepping on a rake and getting hit in the face, or rather, I should say more specifically, trying to get me fired and not getting me fired, or getting me fired and then having that not work out for him. He accused Barack Obama of all sorts of things, obviously, and he also failed miserably on his on-air screen test on InfoWars, which was difficult for him. Also a professional, what do they call him? Pickup artist? Wasn't he basically was telling people to how to neg women? And basically, that's the way you pick up the ladies, I guess. But so Dave Rubin had him on for a second time. And I think, look, Dave Rubin can have on whoever he wants, and he can obviously not have on whomever he wants. But it seems to me there should be some accounting for platforming a guy like that. And they talked about some of the stuff, of course, the massive amounts of pedophile rings that he is convinced happened. But as far as I know, Dave did not bring up the widely publicized attempt to get me fired. They did complain, however, about how hard it is and how online culture is so despicable. In fact, do we have that clip? Let's play that now. There was a here is this is clip number 5, right? Is that it, or is that the best one? I think so. Oh yeah. Okay, so let's play a compilation from the actual filmmaker, Vic Berger, as opposed to the fake filmmaker that is Mike Cernovich. And here he is doing his rendition of the talk between Dave Rubin and Mike Cernovich, wherein Mike Cernovich really is upset. I will remind you that Mike Cernovich claims to have paid someone to dig through my tweets. They found a tweet from 2009 where I satirically chastised those people who were being apologists for Roman Polanski as a rapist, wherein I wrote in response to a petition that was going around in Hollywood trying to get Roman Polanski, get him some type of Lifetime Achievement Award or something to that effect, wherein I wrote, regarding Polanski, don't care about him, but if my daughter is ever raped, I hope it's by a much older man with a great sense of mise en scène. And the satire there obviously was that it is absurd that you would let someone off for the rape of an underage girl because they're a great filmmaker. That seems absurd. Well, of course, Mike Cernovich hired someone to dig through my tweets. That's all they could find. They tried to weaponize that with the use of bots. They had Donald Trump Jr. retweet it. They had Seb Gorka retweet it. Mike Cernovich and his folks pretended to be outraged citizens, members of a pedophile victims group, and emailed all of our advertisers in an attempt to get them to end their association with this program, and ultimately got me fired from MSNBC, and then ultimately I was rehired. That did not come up in this conversation, but what did come up is how hard being a public figure is for Mike Cernovich, as told through this Vic Berger video.
Berger did, we had... All right, I think we're live. We're live. Mike Cernovich, how you doing, man?
I think about every day how I ruined my life by ever becoming a public figure. And I could just write my books and live a good life, and nobody knew who I was. And before Trump ran, I was in a Parisian cafe, just writing, having fun with my wife, walking around looking at Notre Dame before it burned down and everything. And every day I think I ruined my life by becoming a public figure, because just the fundamental indecency of it all is not something that I was prepared for. I'm prepared for a hit. But the angry little weird left people, the freaks, the weird Mike, and the people who support my family being harassed, they'll do all the dunking on Twitter. That does make you, in a way, it makes you sad. And the problem with making people like me sad is sometimes I hold my daughter and I think about the people who are trying to hurt her.
I remember we went to some party because my buddy's girlfriend said that this guy raped her. Mm-hmm. And we go, let's go kill him.
Right. You all know what Vic Berger did. You know he edited fake videos about my wife and daughter. Fact. You know that he's edited multiple videos about my daughter. Fact. And we're back. Sorry, my child's trying to be in this, but this isn't really kid-friendly. Yes, these are all real. So just ask them, what did they mean by that? And you know the emails he sent me, the threats, you know that I've gone to police, you've seen the police reports. So
This is some clown. This
is some clown, but they're watching.
He calls me alt-right and racist.
Yeah, this is my message to them. He made fake videos about my wife and daughter. This could be an actual pedophile ring, so I have to just make it public and publicize it. They're all connected to this guy. His Twitter handle is VICBERGER the 4th. Please, vet, call the cops. Again, they're all connected to this one guy. He's at the middle of all, Vic Berger. Fuck you, sue me. You know, like, I just don't give a fuck.
All right, man. Well, on that note, I hope we cleaned up some of this. The chips will fall where they may, and we'll both keep going, I suppose. And
my pleasure. Thanks again.
Yeah, good talking to you.
Yes. There it is, folks. And apparently Dave Rubin now wants to host Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. And boy, it seems to me that would be a huge mistake for that Democratic primary hopeful to appear in that same very seat where but if he wants to be seen in the same light as someone like Mike Cernovich, I mean, I'm not, I have no bone to pick with Mayor Pete. He's not necessarily my favorite candidate.
I have plenty.
But if that's what he wants to do, then I say more power to you. I hope that that brings you dividends. I just have a feeling it won't bring you the dividends you think it will. If you are a fan of Mayor Pete's, I would suggest to him probably not a good idea. But, like I say, to each their own. And again, I want to remind you when Mike answered the question, the eternal question of Mike Cernovich, who's laughing now, Sam? It's me. I'm laughing now. Ha ha. Ha ha. Ha ha. All right, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. Just a reminder, you can become a member of this program. In fact, you can still become a member of the Mike Cernovich Can Kiss My Ass tier, a membership tier on Majority Report. Head to jointhemajorityreport.com. Just pennies a day. You can support this program. You get extra content. You get it commercial free. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Today is Wednesday, May 15th. That means that yesterday was Tuesday, May 14th. What happened last night in this office, Michael?
We had a mini illicit history of the Iranian Revolution and how that government works. Then Emma Vigeland joined us, and we talked about everything from the Knicks and the NBA draft, which means quite a lot to Emma. I did not know
she's
her
a huge
expertise.
Knicks fan, right?
I knew she was, but I didn't it's not just the fandom. It's like, I think Bhaskar Sunkara is the only other Knicks dedicated head that I've ever met. Like Waz doesn't care about that. But so we talked about that. We had a Game of Thrones segment, which I'm pretty sure will never happen again on the show, and talked about the many, 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 many ways that Joe Biden is very bad for you and not good, and of course a whole bunch of other stuff. You can get the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, and also for patrons, you can get your pre-ordered tickets to our Chicago live show in August and Michael Brooks Show on YouTube and everywhere else.
Jamie?
So this week on the Antifada, we took a turn for the erudite after talking about butt stuff in the Star Report with Katie Halper last week. And we spoke with Samuel Stein, not the one from HuffPost, the Marxist geographer, author of Capital City, Gentrification, and the Real Estate State, which is out now from Verso Books. And we basically talked all about the global housing crisis, where it comes from, why the economy is so reliant on real estate at this point in time, how even well-meaning progressive politicians and planners are ultimately constrained by the system, and how we might ultimately unite and slay the housing monster. So check it out.
Check it out, folks. Check out Hiawatha Talk on on Matt's podcast, Literary Hangover. Quick break, fun half. See you there.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Homo says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck 'em. Homo says what?
What?
Homo says what? Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder, Majority Report. Fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to it. We are here. I mentioned at the break, as we were talking about Dave Rubin, and let's just get all the Dave Rubin stuff out of the way today. I mean, I try and have differing opinions on this program, and some people think Dave Rubin is a bit of a charlatan. Other people think that he's not very bright. I welcome all the opinions.
Not really.
About Dave Rubin.
Some of us have been
literally
silenced.
There's no reason to be ad hominem, but we can get to that later. But first, let's talk about this.
Straight.
I mentioned earlier in the program that Dave Rubin had invited Mayor Pete Buttigieg on his program on the same day he was hosting the date rape denialist Mike Cernovich on his program, the smear merchant, and who is it Cernovich.com?
Cernovich.com.
Okay. And here is Dave Rubin talking about that very same left media outrage that he would invite, or that Mayor Pete would go on the same program. Now, I tweeted out, I wonder if Mayor Pete knows about this, just simply because I'm curious. Will impact my assessment of Mayor Pete if he did know about this. I think other people were tweeting at Mayor Pete, like, I wouldn't go on there. And I can assure you, folks, it was not because of the hard-hitting questions that they anticipated from Dave Rubin. I think they were worried about it hurting Mayor Pete's image. That's up to them. If they're supporters, I could understand why they would do that. But here is Dave Rubin and date rape denialist Mike Cernovich discussing it.
That the usual suspects will come after me for even doing this. It's like there is probably somebody out there now that I would like to get on the show that simply will not come on the show because I'm doing this right now. I mean, even yesterday, I contacted Paul Buttigieg. His
pause it. It's Pete Buttigieg. Calling him Paul may be part of the reason why he doesn't come on. But
Paul should come on.
Go ahead.
Our person DM'd me because I asked him to come on the show, and we're looking into it. But then the blue checkers again, calling me all these awful things, and it's like, what are you guys all doing? Like, what is it that they're all trying to accomplish by deplatforming and destroying everybody?
Well, it's turf wars. Something interesting happened.
Incidentally, I want to remind you that what did not come up in this conversation was again, widely reported. You can read about it in the New York Times, in the Washington Post. You could read it on Huffington Post. It was reported everywhere that the guy sitting across from Dave Rubin, when he complains about deplatforming, got me fired from MSNBC, tried to get all of our advertisers to pull out of this show. This is an independent show. We are not, unlike Dave Rubin, ever in our history having taken any money from any large political or ideological institution. Can Dave Rubin say that? No, he cannot. So if one is going to be talking about deplatforming and be sitting across your table from a deplatformer, you would expect he would say something. I, unlike Dave Rubin, will always wear H&M underwear. Not really. Mine is FTL, Fruit of the Loom. But go ahead.
Well, it's turf wars. Something interesting happened when Huffington Post had to lay off a bunch of people. Like, everyone's like, oh my God, hire these great minds or whatever. And I went to their Twitter accounts. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not interesting. You're not. This is another basic hot take, white male, patriarchy, everybody's evil. It's like, no, they're fungible. What they're doing is they're producing a fungible content, which is outrage directed at a specific group of people. And then people like you, people like Joe Rogan, they're jealous. They're jealous of those people. And they, rather than just say, and again, this is like a mindset issue, rather than just say, yeah, I'm kind of jealous of those people. Maybe I ought to figure out what they're doing. Maybe I ought to up my own game. They want to attack and destroy. And largely that's because left-wing politics today, orthodoxy, is largely based on the resentment.
Well, I don't in any way resent Dave Rubin or Joe Rogan. If I had really wanted to make an extraordinary amount of money, I would have stayed in show business and continued on with my career there many, many years ago. I am quite happy with this show. And in fact, I will explain something to Mike Cernovich, who mutated his online pickup artist brand into a men's rights advocate brand, into a date rape denialist brand, into a quasi-alt-right brand, giving the white power sign at the podium in the White House, and maybe back into a documentary filmmaker brand or whatever he's trying to brand himself now. My project has nothing to do with the success of this show. That is a means in which to do it, and surely I want to make a living and provide for my family. But the project is, understand, it's not attacking folks like you because of resentment. It's attacking folks like you to make sure that your influence is minimized. I don't even care how much success you have. I just want to make sure that your influence is minimized. So if you can make a living as a date rape denialist who doesn't have much of an audience, but somehow you get paid, I'm perfectly happy with that. Same with Dave Rubin. If you can make a living, get paid by all these institutions without having an outdo influence, without hoodwinking people like Sam Harris into thinking that guys that Tommy Robinson's a good guy.
He seemed reasonable from everything that I heard.
Yeah.
I have not heard all of Adolf Hitler's interviews. I heard one and the plans for the Autobahn where he was making a lot of good noises, but I've been smeared.
And so, I want to prevent other Sam Harrises out there, as it were, from getting hoodwinked. And so that is my agenda. It is not driven by resentment, but it will involve not attacking, I think, is not necessarily the word I would say. I would say continue to inform people of why you should have no credit in their minds. Meanwhile, it's clearing the decks of the Dave Rubin material that we have here. We have 2 more segments. Here's Dave Rubin at the University of Delaware, and he was asked a question by a listener of this program, in fact, who spoke to us the other day. I think he goes by the moniker Rave Dubin. And what I found interesting about this with Dave Rubin is that about a year and 2 ago, back when Dave Rubin used to identify as or would use certain bona fides to establish his credibility of being on the left so that his critique could work just like Dennis Prager liked it to work. He would say, of course, he would cite his identity as being a gay man who was married as proof that he was of the left, which is, I guess, identity politics. I'm not sure how it's defined with him. And then he would also say, I'm also against the death penalty, and I am pro-choice, although that seems to be wavering now. He seems to, at the very least, feel obligated to say that I'm reluctant pro-choice because he knows who is buttering his bread, so to speak, his toast. And he used to say that he was a single-payer supporter. Now, he simultaneously said he was for smaller government. And when people started pointing out, we here at the Majority Report, one of those entities that pointed it out, that to be for single payer means that you are for a larger government. That is the way that we define larger government. Now, I'm not for large government or small government. I'm for a government that provides for its people some basic necessities. One of those is healthcare. And so he since stopped calling himself a supporter of single payer. But what's interesting is never, it appears, in the time that he was a supporter of single payer, nor as a former supporter of single payer, has he taken the time to figure out, even remotely speaking, what single payer means. And here is the proof.
So I used to say that I was for single payer. Single payer meaning that there was competition within the marketplace, but that then the government sort of facilitated and worked around that. So there could be some subsidies. The government could figure out how to work with all the private companies. In principle...
Pause it.
Am I allowed to
wait a
speak
second,
and be
wait a
platformed?
second. Wait a second. I just want to be clear here. All right. What he is describing is the marketplace for insurance as it stood prior to Obamacare. That was the government sort of works around and allows the private market to, that's called regulation and creating markets. And every state has regulators and there is some federal regulation. Arguably, what he's describing is also Obamacare, which creates small exchanges only for people who don't get insurance in other ways. And the government subsidizes that for people who make anywhere from 133% of poverty to 400% of poverty. And there was also, according with Obamacare, an expansion from 100% poverty to 133% poverty of an expansion of Medicaid in those states that allowed for it. Single payer is none of those things. Now, he goes on to continue to show that he doesn't know what he's talking about in terms of single payer. Just a little bit.
Private companies. In principle, I'm for that because that to me strikes me as I would say that's a very classical liberal position, that you allow competition and that the government has a light touch on how to facilitate everything. The reason I'm struggling to say that now is because if you listen to what the Democratic candidates are saying, I mean, I'm not making this up, this is what they're saying, from Bernie to Elizabeth Warren to almost all of them now. They're saying not only is it going to be Medicare for all, but they're going to literally stop private companies from being able to be in the marketplace. That I would be completely against. The idea that the government would be the sole provider. Really think about it this way. If you had any problem...
Okay, I want you to really think about this. The government as the sole provider of health insurance would be like almost like having one payer for medical stuff. That would be like having a single payer for medical insurance, like a single payer. Can you imagine that? Now,
one payer.
We should
a
be
singular
clear,
payer.
Just to correct him, all of the candidates now at this point have said there'll be some role for private insurance. It'll be very limited, but there'll be some role for private insurance in the healthcare market. But it's as if you have a single payer paying it. Now, I want to allow for a difference of opinion as to what Dave Rubin, what the issue there was.
Well, first some clarifications and ground rules. Can one of those opinions be that he's dim without being silenced?
No, you cannot say, and I have said this, Michael, and I don't want to have to reprimand you on air because we exchange ideas here. You could say the idea that he has about single payer is dim.
Well, look, I'm only interested in talking about policy, not people.
You could float the idea that there's something, the idea that there's something wrong with him, that he doesn't understand it, or you could say there's something wrong with the English language, that single payer is so obtuse.
Right. I think that especially with the brain in recovery mode from so many high-level ideas like declining white birth rates, whatever else, that how difficult the terminology of single payer is unfair to Dave.
Fair enough.
That's my idea, is that it might be beyond his capacity.
That's
in my thinking.
We should get Barry Weiss on the phone to see if this is what is this what we meant by the intellectual dark web?
I could think of another D word that could be in there.
I could think of two.
I don't even care about those guys. It really just honestly doesn't matter.
And of course, there was the requisite ask, will you be debating Sam Seder? Let's just play that, tag it on at the end there. And of course, his refusal, because all we do is talk about how his ideas are lacking.
All right, easy question.
Yes.
Is there anyone, I know you won't debate Sam Seder in the majority report, is there anyone on the progressives, David Pacman, or from Counterpoints that you would be willing to have a discussion with?
Anyone that won't go after me, Pacman's lied about me a bunch of times.
I know you had him on the show once.
Oh yeah, and I did have him on the show. I mean, again, this is what I would say is if the lefties that I've had on consistently, who I think are my good friends, if that's not left enough for you, I don't even mean you specifically, but if that's not left enough for you, the problem might be with you more than it's with me. You know what I mean? Like, that really is the truth. Like, just because someone...
I knew you would have
because someone's screaming and yelling all day long and lying, it doesn't mean I have to talk to them. I mean,
Pause it. No, he doesn't, but it's an interesting frame. I have a diversity of thought, and if you don't think I do, then maybe the problem is that you're too diverse in your thought, and you're outside of the realm of diverse thought. Talk about blow your mind, man. That blows my mind. You're too diverse to fit within the confines of diversity.
Glass houses.
Let's go to the phones. Call him
the idea of Dave. I mean, just David Pacman. I mean,
yeah, Pacman.
He's lying about you.
What a yeller.
Slang. Right. I know. It's like, okay, I can accept he's lying. We haven't been dishonest about him. You haven't been dishonest about him, but sure, we take a piss. But David Pacman, I mean, wow.
Right.
Wow.
What is it about conservatives that they don't have a sense of humor? You calling from a 985 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Go to the phones.
985? 985.
Oh, is this me?
Yes, it is you.
Oh, hi. Hi. Sorry, I left the room for a minute.
Okay. Now you're back.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah,
name?
Sorry.
Where
Sorry,
are you
a little
calling
nervous.
from?
Oh, Patrick.
Patrick, you're calling from?
Oh, I'm from New Orleans, but I'm calling from Virginia.
Okay. And what is on your mind, Patrick, formerly from New Orleans?
My question was, so my parents watch a lot of MSNBC. Unfortunately, they don't watch it when you're on.
Oh,
but
I understand.
Yeah, that's the bad part. But my parents are so. For quick reference, I'm a Marxist. I've been a Marxist for the past couple of years. Considered myself one, and people like my parents and a lot of people I know, like in my family and around me, they're with me morally, but not ideologically. And I think part of that is that there's very little representation of like an actual leftist argument in American media.
Right.
And I was curious as to what you think, how we can really put those people, like give them more of a spotlight. Because I think that if you put it more in like a global context, you would get more people who would, like they wouldn't shake at socialists. Like they wouldn't freak out if like someone said like, I'm a Marxist, I'm a democratic socialist or a social democrat. And I was curious as to what you thought we could do to like contact those people more clearly.
Well, I and I think at this point I'm probably, and I will also say that I do not watch MSNBC that much, but I am probably about as far left on that network as it gets. And
you're a fucking sellout.
And I am a sellout. I just don't think that people can reasonably expect, and maybe reasonably I'm just using in terms of like, I'm not making a value judgment on that these cable news outlets, which are owned by major corporations. I mean, MSNBC is still owned at least a minority share, I don't know, 49% or something by GE. Comcast owns the majority share. But for a long time, GE owned the majority share. And they are one of the, if not the largest weapons manufacturers in the country. And Comcast, of course, is a behemoth. And so the idea that they're going to put any anti-capitalists on their network, it's just I just don't think that's going to happen. I think really, and what your folks are about in their 50s, 60s, maybe?
They're around like 55. Like they're kind of like, I guess you call them like Kennedy Democrats. Like they still really love Bobby Kennedy and people like that.
Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy.
Well, I think
they like Chris Matthews.
Look, I think the bottom line is that.
Oh, my dad loves Chris Matthews.
Yeah, I love it back.
He's like, yeah, he's basically in love with Rachel Maddow.
Oh, no, I don't like Rachel Maddow, but I love Chris Matthews.
The bottom line is just going to be that your generation is going to get its news less and less from cable news, and more and more from sort of the web, where there's going to be a less of a bar to entry for people. And so, on this program, we interview, we have Marxists and anarcho-communists and across the spectrum. And we interview Marxist thinkers and various, critiques of capitalism. And as, time goes on, more and more people are going to get their news from shows like this, where there's, less of a bar to entry. We started this program with no money whatsoever. and just a little bit of like, Radio Shack equipment. And so I think that's going to change over time. But I don't think there is I would not hold your breath. Let's put it that way. I mean, maybe you see someone like, Michael Moore will get on MSNBC occasionally, and I think he has a critique of Capitol, but it's not,
Michael Moore, isn't this what Bobby Kennedy was trying to do?
And so I think, the the reality is that I just don't think. I think the idea is just try and move your parents just as a little bit to the left as possible and get them to vote in the right way. And
Cory Booker, isn't this like getting your first hand job? You're sort of shy about it, but excited. It's a historical moment. Anyways, we wish you the best of luck.
No, I feel you. Trust me. My family is much the same way. I love them very much. I felt really bad having to explain to my mom that I was not actually going on the Rachel Maddow show because someone made a funny Photoshop poster for the Katie Halper show that I was going to be in. But yeah, I mean, in addition to waiting for your parents to die, you could try to find some teachable moments. I think a lot of people in the older generation have been insulated from a lot of the problems caused by neoliberalism and Obama-era politics. So, for instance, I don't know, maybe they've never had to buy healthcare on one of the exchanges before. Maybe you have. Maybe tell them. I pay like...
Sorry, I don't mean...
Maybe let them know how much of your salary per month you pay, and then you still can't afford to go to the doctor because your copay is like $100.
Yeah. I mean, that's the funny thing about my parents is that they actually used to live in Switzerland for like a very brief amount of time, but like I think they're aware of the benefits that come with living in a, like in an actual like welfare state. But I don't know, it freaks me out whenever they talk about this, but like I've had moments where I've been able to like move them a little bit, but it doesn't stick around long because I think they watch MSNBC all the time. Like I was talking to my mom a couple months ago about Lula da Silva in Brazil, and like I think I said something along the line of like my family's Catholic, and I said, like they're basically like Catholic social democrats, like liberation theologians, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And my
literally.
mom got really quiet for a moment, and she was like, I really get that. Like I really, really get that. And the thing is like I'm not in the house that much, but they're watching MSNBC all the time, and I can't come to the house all the time.
Turn them on to some podcasts. It sounds like they're intellectually curious people.
Get them into the Majority Report.
It sounds like
we're a good gateway drug.
It's a nice liberal show with occasional Marxists.
I was at a wedding in Houston.
I talk about you guys all the time. I like every time you go on whenever you go on Chris Hayes, I say like you should watch his show. And they're on the computer all the time, so I don't know why they're not doing it. But
there's this motherfucking kid who impersonates me on Cedar's podcast.
Here's what you do, okay? You go into their computer, in their browser.
Yeah.
You change all of the addresses on their favorites on their browser bar. You go in. You don't change the logo or whatnot, but you go in. You hit info on their favorite their bookmarks. All you got to do is you hit, the bookmark manager, and you change it all and send them directly to YouTube videos of the Majority Report that you like, so that there's really virtually nowhere they can go online almost, and then they accidentally will fall into it, and that's what you do. So good luck with that, Patrick. Tell me how that goes.
All right, will do.
Thanks Patrick.
Appreciate it. Let's go into a 330 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Nicholas Galena from Canton, Ohio.
Nicholas, what's on your mind?
Well, I have first a campaign finance reform question and a foreign policy question.
Okay.
But I wanted to start off with the campaign finance reform question. So there seems to be an emerging debate within progressive circles about the idea of a democracy voucher program, where Seattle has created this program before, where they gave everybody the ability to contribute a $25 voucher in a local election based off of an increase in property taxes that was supposed to be progressive in nature. And so Kirsten Gillibrand has proposed a program like this where she would have a $100 voucher only in federal elections, and it would be paid for by increases in taxes on executive compensation. And so do you think that this could be a good short-term program that could allow for us to increase the balance of power towards progressives while shooting for a long-term goal of ending the Citizens United ruling?
I mean, I think matching funds is a more more aggressive version of this, and I'm sort of that's the one I would like. I mean, it seems to me if you can get democracy dollars, then you can also get matching funds. It's the same way, and it just doesn't have the same sort of like, I don't know, maybe using vouchers is supposed to be the language that will attract conservatives because they like vouchers. I mean, I think these programs are good. I definitely think they're good. I definitely am in favor of them, and I would go for the one that the sort of the most aggressive one we could get. I don't see, I don't have any problem with it, if that's what you mean. I think matching funds are good, but if there's some data that shows that calling them democracy vouchers is somehow better than fine, but in principle it's very similar to just matching funds. And that's
in principle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, sure, why not?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the next question is more of a Michael question. So there was a recent change in leadership in Kazakhstan, where Tokayev, the former president of the Senate, I believe, is replacing the former president Nazarbayev, and there's some talk in local media about how the new president could have more populist policies, where it would allow for a change in banking policy in terms of the bank lending rates and stuff like that. So my question was, do you think that there could be a significant change in terms of the leadership in Kazakhstan? Because it is important from the perspective of how they're being forced into the Eurasian Customs Union, and that allows for Russia to have a greater influence over their economy.
I don't know about. I think they're pretty on board with being part of that Eurasia project themselves. I'm not sure that they're more excited necessarily to be, aligned outside of their own region. But as far as the specifics of that change, I don't know nearly enough about it. I'll research it.
Appreciate the call.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for the call. Calling from a 610 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Sam. Mike from Pennsylvania. How
Mike
are you?
from Pennsylvania. Long time no hear from.
Oh, it's that cocky motherfucker, Mike from PA. Just days after Sam finally admitted defeat in the conversation about the impeachment, where he had been relentlessly wrong for months, maybe Mac will bow down to me as well today, or I'll smack him across the goddamn face.
I would love to hear John's opinion on Violent John. It's great. I just
okay.
More about Biden, if I could.
Well, I mean, let's talk more about Biden, because this is pretty stunning. I mean, and we should just add before, in addition to sort of like his deluded call for Republicans who are going to all have an epiphany after Donald Trump loses, which I don't even understand the mechanics of that, frankly. There's polling out now that suggests that Joe Biden really may have a serious problem with women in the Democratic Party, particularly those who are sympathetic to the Me Too movement, because, well, for I think a litany of reasons. But that's all the Joe Biden news that I have today. What is your commentary, Mike?
Well, I think the one thing is people being surprised about his comments about the Republican Party kind of giving space for the Republican Party to recover. He's not stupid. He was aware. He was vice president during the Obama administration. He knows that they blocked him for not just the 8 years. Like the first, there was a famous story about when Obama came in, as you recall, Mitch McConnell saying, "I'm going to make you a one-term president."
Right.
And then immediately the reaction was a backlash from the Republican Party, and not just the Republican Party elected officials, but also their voters. And basically Obama spent 6 years as a lame duck, and he accomplished nothing of note after 2010 other than through executive action. So he knows that. He's not delusional. So either he's completely cynical to the point of like he's willing to lie to everyone's face, or he is suffering from dementia. And I think it's the former rather than the latter.
Right. Well, you're not a doctor, so you wouldn't be able to tell about that. But yes, I think he's
that's
being
true. That's
incredibly cynical, and he is playing on. And this is what's so dangerous about running this way, is because you create certain expectations. You give certain credit to the Republicans, and this stuff is like he is. This is a case of like basically like I'm going to burn down the village to save it. Except for in this instance, what he's saving is it really is like I'm going to burn down the village to be the president of it.
Well, and that's right. Like, here's the thing. Let's look at the context here. In 2018, he went up to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There was I think it's the 6th district of Michigan. Congressman by the name of Fred Upton was in a tough re-election race, one of the targeted races of Democrats. And Biden did a paid speech for $200,000 in front of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, where he praised Fred Upton. And Fred Upton, I think, ended up winning with 50.3% of the vote in the election. So this is the context of Joe Biden. He's not just saying this, as a hypothetical. He's going out there and defeating Democrats with his. And it's kind of funny.
But to be fair, he's doing that for money. So
yeah, he's doing it. Well, right. And this is something that is kind of funny for me, because the one thing you hear from centrist Dems is, hey, everybody's unrealistic, but at least we're real Democrats. We're dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. Except for when it's not convenient, he'll go and do a paid speech. And so...
Oh, forgive him, Father. Kind of he's sinned. Forgive him, Father. He's sinned.
Oh, forgive me. I helped Fred Upton get reelected.
Excuse me.
Oh, folks, we got to get rid of the purity politics over here. Oh, Mike from PA doesn't like that I've kept a seat red. Ooh, boo. You're not going to like my plans for Social Security either. By fever breaking, I mean not that the abortion bills will be reversed, but that we will cut Medicare and Social Security together in a collegial manner where Mike Pence will say nice things about me. Incidentally, Mike Pence good, Dick Cheney good, healthcare. Fuck that.
Hey, Mike, if you're feeling uncomfortable, let me give you a massage.
That's
give you a little fucking rub down.
But the one thing about Biden is the support is wide. And that's just a true statement. He's the best thought of candidate by the Democratic primary electorate. Like, most people have a fond memories of Joe Biden.
Yeah, they think he's the man.
I compare them to their fond memories of George W. Bush. I mean, if you go look at the polls now, I think 58% of Democrats have a positive view of George W. Bush. Now, that's because he's out of the game.
Yes,
and
I was just going to say. This is largely my theory about why these numbers could fall, and that is the more he gets back into the game, and people start to see not the Joe Biden of the sentimental Joe Biden, not the Vice President of Barack Obama Joe Biden, but the Joe Biden of Joe Biden. I think, and like I say, I am also willing to concede that so much of this is aspirational on my part, that his numbers are going to fall significantly.
Well, think about it. Let's compare it to the most, like, if you look at Hillary Clinton, she was kind of in a similar position as a as a person that was, well thought of by the Democratic electorate. And then she got into the game, and her popularity dropped about 20 points. And then it dropped another 20 points over the course of the rest of the election. So you go from plus 30 to minus 20 on election day.
She was the first. She was, I think, at one point, like right before the election started, she was considered the most popular woman in the world or something. There was some, I can't remember exactly. There was some poll that came out that just basically had her up there with Mother Teresa. Yeah.
She lost that position to Michelle Obama during the course of the election.
Right.
And that's kind of the situation. But, on the other hand, I don't think we should take things too lightly because, if you turn on MSNBC, and unfortunately I did this morning, I broke my promise not to watch it anymore for my own, mental health. You have Joe Scarborough and that crew, like they're just talking up Joe Biden.
Of course.
And the fantasy of like the Republican Party just, it's just going through a phase right now.
Yeah.
But there was no Donald Trump when they blocked Merrick Garland.
Yeah, I know.
I would like to see Joe Biden's answer to that.
Well, he was running at that time. Let me, it seemed a little tense, Mike. Let me maybe just see if I can rub a couple of knots out of your neck. All right, appreciate the call, man.
Stan, anytime you want, my friend, anytime.
Whoa.
These people are so full of hubris.
This is a good signal, though, the thing I sent you.
Yeah, well, hold on. Wait, go ahead.
I really thought that maybe when they saw Bernie doing so well, they would realize they needed to compromise and be like, all right, we'll give you Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or someone who's like pretty progressive, but still within the realm of establishment Democrat acceptableness. But no, they're going to go for the gold. And
who's the they
might
though,
get
in this
it.
scenario?
The Democratic establishment, the mainstream media.
I don't think the Democratic establishment is. I mean, it depends on who you think the Democratic establishment is, because
I have an idea.
Well, okay, but I mean, do you think the Democratic establishment is interested in Joe Biden as much as they are maybe in as they would have been in a Kamala Harris? I mean, right now, who knows? People, change their opinions based upon the polls, but I don't think there was any great hunger amongst the establishment for Joe Biden. Do you, Mike?
Well, there's like so many different types of when you say establishment, that means so many different things.
That's exactly my point. If you're talking about, party leaders who are apparatchiks in Pennsylvania, they may. But if you're talking
they're
about...
They're all in for Joe.
Yeah, but if you're talking about like former Obama people, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the former Obama people were like,
They're split.
Well,
no, there's
what
former
they really
Obama
want-
people who are involved with Biden, and there's Obama people with every prominent candidate except for Sanders.
Right.
I mean, I think I get what I think like on the level of if it's gonna be Biden who's leading in the polls, the Morning Joe cast is more than happy to
but I'm just
bathe
talking
him
about
in praise.
the they in terms of the Democratic establishment pushing Joe Biden on there. I think that if you could actually figure out who the Democratic establishment is, I think they'd be of multiple minds. I'm sure they would rather Joe Biden than Bernie Sanders. But if they had to pick, they would have. If Joe Biden came out with 18 points in the polls, I think he would just go away immediately. I think the fact that he is resonating is probably drawing some of those people to him as a solution to Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, they really want to stop Bernie Sanders. They care about that more than who is the person who does it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's true
Yeah,
because
like
I think they know there's not that much of a difference maybe between Biden and the
Biden,
people
Harris,
But
and
he seems
Buttigieg,
like the only
they're all the
person who
same.
could do it. And I think
policy-wise,
that's why we're going to see them uniting behind Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Although I think they're still holding out hope, but we'll see.
I don't know. I think James is right.
Well, there's kind of I think the priority is mainly to prevent a changing of the guard. Yeah, and what I mean by that is the people that are operating the levers behind the scenes. Like when we fought that Keith Ellison versus, whatever his name is, I forgot already, fight, for the DNC chair. Like, why did
Tom
Obama
Perez.
intervene and call all those DNC members and say, please don't vote for Keith Ellison? It's because they don't want to have a changing of the guard and a changing of outlook. Because we all have the same information about how popular Medicare for all is, or how popular raising taxes is on the rich. Why isn't Joe Biden running on that? It's because he doesn't believe that the electorate ultimately is going to hold him accountable for not supporting popular policy.
Right.
And he's willing to gamble on that because he's getting a lot of money and support because he's providing a bulwark against those policies.
And we should also say
that's kind of.
I think
Yes.
that's a key
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got one of his top campaign. I think his campaign pollster is signed up with an ancillary group to Trump's new NAFTA proposal in a fight against labor contemporaneously.
Yeah. And I think that's true. And I also would say that, like, I don't know that it is. Some people make the mistake, I think, sometimes of saying, like, particularly in that DNC fight, that it was about ideology. It very much just could be like, we want our buddies to get the jobs, and we want we want our buddies to be in a position of influence, because then we're in a position of influence, and we're just in a different clique. That it's not necessarily ideological. That it's just it's a different.
It's one of the reasons they hate Bernie so much. I mean, when you looked at people try to make, remember they tried to make hay in 2016 that he didn't go to, like, he doesn't have a law degree and he didn't have a conventional professional path, which, by the way, I think is a big asset in a general election. But a lot of the subtext of it was definitely like, we've been toiling away at this and that consulting firm or think tank, and we're expecting our rewards.
Right.
And if he doesn't come in, we're not going to get our rewards.
But if it were totally non-ideological, they would just change all of their positions to mirror Bernie's.
A lot of them have, though. That was the first wave. That's what Harris, Booker, and Gillibrand did.
Well,
not
On well, that's absolutely what they've been trying to sell the public.
They're
That's why they
mouthing it.
co-signed. Well, sure, they're mouthing it, but yes, that was the first wave. And now Biden's just betting on the, fuck it, name recognition. We're just going to do it.
I have no way of competing for small donations, and so
I'll just take big
gonna-
corporate donors and muscle it through.
Right. Yeah. Appreciate the call, Mike.
All right. See ya.
Bye. All right, let's take one more call for a moment, and then we will go to a couple more videos. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, this is Jeff in Georgia. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine, man.
Jeff in Georgia.
Listen, you kind of glossed over it yesterday, man. Poor Sargon of Akkad. His videos have been demonetized, been banned
from
Twitter, and I thought it was awful magnanimous of you to suggest that one possible way he could get back into the game was a little pay-per-view event. And of course, you and your audience know that I run myself a little show, a little podcast.
Oh, yes.
Normally
I've
I'm all
received
busy.
I'm sorry. I've received an email from you. I will respond soon.
Oh, thank you very much. But in other news, of course, I spend a lot of time writing and preparing and making a polished sort of product for people, and people don't want to see that. I think what people really want to see is for me to literally fight in an MMA style cage match, Sargon of Akkad, for money. So I'd like to publicly announce a challenge to Sargon of Akkad. Sargon, I'm not a big guy. I'm only 5.5 feet tall. I will be being publicly trained by Felix Biederman, however, and I invite you to jump into the ring with me and watch me go spider monkey up on your high side.
Well, I would pay money to see that.
And exactly how much money would you pay to see that? I'm just,
I wouldn't pay that much.
It maybe like just 20, 25, 20, 27. I don't know what about that number appeals to me as sort of like moniker for what the average person can afford to give. $27 sounds like a good buy. I don't know, man. Just gonna throw it out there. I know we got a lot of problems in left media. A lot of people don't think that we really have the fire to compete. With the slick propaganda of the right, and I think we really just need to get back to basics and engage in a little consensual violence where I repeatedly punched Sargon of Akkad in the face. So, I just want to throw it out there, man, and I want everyone to have a really good week. Left is best.
Thank you, Jeff from Georgia. Good job,
Yeah,
Brendan.
clip
Fast
that and
on
tweet it at Sargon of Akkad.
You can't.
Let's do a couple more videos here. As you know, the in Alabama, they have voted now to outlaw all abortion with no exceptions, but for the if the life of the mother is jeopardized. Of course, that is a very difficult thing to fully assess, and it's unclear what is the threshold. It's not merely what a doctor says, and at least in terms of legislatively speaking. Here is a clip of the argument on the amendment that would make an exception on this full ban on abortion in Alabama for rape and incest.
Do you know what it's like to be raped?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Do you know what it's like to have a relative commit incest on you?
On me, no, ma'am.
Why would you not want a woman to at least have that exception for such a horrific act?
Because I believe that when that unborn child becomes a person, and we need legal guidance on when that is.
But that's not your business. That is not your business. You don't have to raise that child. You don't have to carry that child. You don't have to provide for that child. You don't have to do anything for that child. But yet, you want to make the decision for that woman that that's what she has to do.
I want to make the decision for that child.
There she goes. There's a lot of that. This mirrors the fight in South Carolina as they are arguing their abortion ban bill. There was a Republican woman, Nancy Mace, who gave a speech about 2 or 3 weeks ago, persuading the House to allow exceptions for rape and incest in their proposed 6-week so-called fetal heartbeat abortion ban. She ended up getting left a card by a fellow lawmaker that said, "It's twisted logic that would kill the unborn child for the misdeed of the parent." Speaking of the rapist committing the misdeed. Who's absent, of course, from that sentence, entirely out of that equation, is the victim. I mean, it is stunning that as far as Republicans and conservatives go, their biggest cry about any type of criminal justice reform or whatever it is you don't pay attention to the victim. The one time where they feel incredibly comfortable in not paying attention to the victim is when it is a woman who is raped. But as grotesque as it is, the nullification of women in the context of a rape or incest, and abortion as that question. I mean, the bottom line is the women are being nullified regardless in just passing a ban on abortion, even if there was an exemption for rape or incest. This is, we've been talking about this now for a couple of weeks. Every new story, every new state that does this, and there's going to be more. Ohio, Georgia. Now we have Alabama, soon South Carolina. There's going to be, by the time we're done, in a couple of months, there's going to be probably about 12. Maybe there'll be more. There certainly will be more. We also get this the other day in the Supreme Court in a completely unrelated case, a roadmap by the 5 conservatives on how you simply ignore the concept of staridicis. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that, staridicis, which is basically respect for precedent. So they're basically providing a roadmap for overturning Roe v. Wade, but we don't know if they're going to do it that way or some other more genteel way. But this is what we're looking at, and this is the reality. This is the Republican Party that's going to have the epiphany, as Joe Biden says, if Donald Trump loses. Here is a clip of on Fox News. And what's this guy's name? Metaxas? He's a writer. And Eric Metaxas, he's a New York Times best-selling author and also an expert on what women should do with their reproductive organs. Here he is on Fox News.
I bring Eric in here because, Eric, that's what we've seen. And a number of states have gone the other direction. They have relaxed any regulation or different, restrictions on abortion. So we're seeing the states tackle this, some going further right, some going further left on this.
That's exactly what's supposed to happen. That's why Roe v. Wade is an abomination. It is not itself constitutional. For the people of Alabama.
It is constitutional. The Supreme Court has decided on that. He wants the Supreme Court to overturn that ruling. The idea that the federal government does not have a right to protect the privacy and the sovereignty of the bodies of its citizens is absurd. It's absurd. I mean, this same guy would argue that states don't have a right to outlaw guns because of the Second Amendment. This guy's not out there worried about state rights when it comes to things like legalizing marijuana. No, this guy's just a religious zealot who wants to impose his religion on the rest of us via this moral code.
For the people of Alabama to be told by federal legislators, shut up, we don't care what you think, we don't care who's in your legislature, we're going to tell you what your laws are. And they said no. The people of Alabama have spoken. And the beauty of this, first of all, I'm thrilled this happened, but for many reasons. Because as an American, this needs to go to the Supreme Court, and people in America need to argue, is this a human life? If it turns out that this is a human life, can't we all agree that it's wrong to take that life? We have to have that conversation.
Pause it. The question isn't whether it's a human life. The question is whether this is a person who is protected by our laws, or whether it is a life that is contingent upon another life and is part of a woman's body. And not just her body, but her destiny. And that's the question. It's not whether it's human life. It's not a question of whether it's life. We don't have these arguments about plants, which are life. It's not a question of whether it's a human life at all. It is a question of whether this is a person who has individual rights that are distinct from the rights of the host that is feeding them and allowing their viability.
Have to have that conversation. The abortion activists have said we don't want to have that conversation. You're on the wrong side of history. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Alabama has forced us to have this conversation, just like many men are forcing women to have abortions because it's legal and the women themselves don't want to make the choice. So let's not kid ourselves that this is empowering women.
Okay.
There is every single opportunity in the world under our laws for a woman to stop a man from forcing her to have an abortion. But what we are seeing is now many, many men forcing women or trying to force women into having children, forced pregnancies. That's what we're seeing. That's literally what we're seeing. And they are using the apparatus of the law to do it. Whereas to the extent that what this guy is claiming is true, and I don't know that it is true, if there's any men who are forcing women to have abortions, there is recourse for that.
Well, look, I mean, it does happen, right? I have heard from people whose abusive partners have coerced them into having an abortion. But the answer to that, and if he really cared about women's agency, is to take steps to give women more power over their own lives, right? So socialized medicine, education, childcare, things of that nature. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't support those things.
So this is where we're at. And I don't know. I wonder how Joe Biden explains this away. I'd be very,
folks,
very
after the election's over, this guy's not going to be on Fox talking about stripping away women's basic autonomy. When Donald Trump leaves, he leaves, or he becomes a different person. Besides, I met him once at a restaurant in downtown Manhattan. I don't remember the name of it to button this joke, but he was very nice to me there.
U.S. State Department has ordered non-emergency embassy staff to leave Iraq. Why? Well, of course. It's because a travel advisory warned numerous terrorist and insurgent groups are active in Iraq, regularly attacking both Iraqi security forces and civilians. Anti-U.S. sectarian militias may also threaten U.S. Citizens and Western companies throughout Iraq. It is an attempt to make it seem and to build this narrative that somehow Iran is attacking America. Tried to do it with this story of the boats. Unfortunately, they forgot to damage the Saudi boats that were supposedly attacked by Iran or Iranian proxies. You've got to. If you're going to try and start a war, you've got to look back into history and realize you need to sink these boats. You need to do some damage on it if you're going to do it. U.S. lawmakers are upset because they are in the dark in terms of what's going on in Iran. I think I don't know, we may update that Treat of Parsi that did for Ring of Fire that we're going to play maybe on Memorial Day. I think it's going to be consistent. Michael had an updated talk with him the other night. But the bottom line is the understanding, at least from people on the outside, is that Bolton and Pompeo and the neocons want a war with Iran. Donald Trump, of course, has no sense of whether he wants a war or not. He just wants to have a win. If he can make a new deal with them, I guess, that could be exactly the same as the old deal, but he gets the credit for it. He would be happy with that. He thinks that's what Pompeo and Bolton are doing. They are telling him we are trying to be tough, bring him to the negotiation table, when, of course, Michael and I were talking about this before. It's easy to say you could do that with North Korea because they have to the extent that they have internal politics, it is much more like Game of Thrones stuff where they don't worry about the populace. But in Iran, they actually have like broad swaths of politics that involve domestic opinion and whatnot. So leaders are constrained there by that. And there are different competing factions as to what should happen in regards to the United States. What will protect them as much? It's not just a dude drinking Cristal who likes to have Trump there, and I'm going to talk him up. Although that didn't work for Trump. And so what we have is basically a rudderless administration with some factions in the administration paddling in one direction, hoping that they'll get caught into a current and the current will do the rest of the work. And that is a spiral into war. And that's where we're at. Supposedly, U.S. lawmakers are in the dark. That's what members of Congress are saying. But Lindsey Graham says, I think all of us are in the dark over here. Well, Tom Cotton seems to be able to see in the dark. Here he is on firing line. Was this Margaret Hoover? Is that her name?
Could we win a war with Iran?
Yes.
That didn't take you a second.
2 strikes, the first strike and the last strike.
What are the conditions or the circumstances that would justify going to war with Iran?
Pause it. You know, that sounds really glib, and it's supposed to project that he knows what he's talking about. But we just went through 2 wars that lasted about 18 years. We still basically have people there. It just depends on how you want to define a war. So it's also conceivable to not have that last strike. In fact, I think we've had that last strike multiple times in both those countries, those pronouncements. But it sounds really glib to say, yes, we can win any war we want to. I think history has shown that that's not the case. But Tom Cotton understands that if I say it confidently enough, it'll make it sound like it actually is something that means something.
This is
going to war with Iran.
Well, if Iran struck out militarily against the United States or against our allies in the region, then I would certainly expect a devastating response against Iran.
As somebody who fought in 2 fronts in the Middle East, both in Iraq and in Afghanistan, do you think it would be a good idea to go to war with Iran?
No, I don't advocate military action against Iran. I'm simply delivering the message that if Iran were to attack the United States, it would be a grave miscalculation on their part, and there would be a furious response. Now, we don't want to govern Iran. We don't want to rule 80 million Iranians. We want 80 million Iranians to be able to govern themselves.
Where are you on regime change?
What I want is to have an outlaw regime change its behavior, to rejoin the civilized world and stop supporting terrorism and trying to overthrow the governments of so many of its neighbors. Ultimately, it's up to the Iranian people and their leaders to decide how they're going to govern their country. But with men like those in charge of Iran, I think we're going to see what we've seen for the last 40 years, which is a revolutionary theological movement that's hijacked the powers of a nation state.
I wonder if that means on any level to you that war is inevitable.
War is never inevitable. War is always the product of human choices.
Yeah, like for instance, if you break a deal, that is the first step in achieving what he wants to achieve. And it's a huge first step, massive first step. I mean, this is dangerous because they really are basically just setting up. We're just going to keep putting ourselves close enough, threatening enough to the regime so that if something goes awry and it can be perceived as an attack on us, well, then we would have to have devastating responses. I mean, it's really problematic. I would imagine they are setting up an attack by a proxy, as it were, but we will continue to watch this.
Proxy.
It's
Tom
scary.
Cotton was a prime, also, somebody who tried to destroy the initial deal with poison pills. And what's amazing is that all of these ancillary issues, which at some of them you have to figure out, some of them the United States just has to stop trying to demand, other countries submit to its will on every single thing. But the whole precision of how this deal worked was that it didn't include all these ancillary issues and was a success as a result of it. And everybody needs to be reminded that there is absolutely no institution on earth, including even the Trump administration, that denies that Iran wasn't living up to its obligations.
That's right. What happened was there was a very specific call to bipartisan to deal specifically with the Iran's nuclear program. And the Obama administration pursued that exclusive agenda. Not whether Iran was funding Hamas, not whether they were providing food for, factions in Yemen, not whether they were supportive of Hezbollah, not whether they were involved in Iraq. None of it. It was specifically the development of nuclear weapons. Step 1, massive step. Massive step. They took it. They were successful. They were there. We had it. No one contends that this was broken. And as soon as that deal was signed, every single Republican was like, it doesn't include stuff that we specifically didn't want included in the first place. And now we have a way of attacking it. It really is stunning, and it's super scary. Folks, the war with Iran is not the only war we are waging. How do I know? Because I listened to a Seb Gorka clip today. Here is Seb Gorka. Man, this guy. A tight shot, and I love how they do their ad. Is that an ad? Relief Factor? Is that an ad right on the microphone?
Interesting.
Brilliant.
I'm ready for my close-up.
Super close-up.
From the Dennis Prager School of just put that baby right on my forehead.
He's got a painting of the Twin Towers in the background.
Hell yeah,
you can
dude.
see that. He's got an old reel-to-reel, which signifies they're doing a radio show. There is a presidential seal. Presumably, he either had a facsimile made up, or he stole that. Here he is, Seb Gorka. What is old is new, folks. I remember doing a prank phone call to the American Family Association on their breakthrough report on how Lenny the squid, Lenny the shark in, what movie was it? Shark Tales was actually promoting transgenderism, I think. Yes. Well, guess what, folks? Seb Gorka's found his reason to continue to be a person.
That's been the left, from Robespierre to Trotsky to Marcuse to Alinsky to Clinton to Obama to today. Civil society.
Wait. Can we go back over? Can we start that over again? Because that's quite a lineage.
That's been the left, from Robespierre to Trotsky to Marcuse to Alinsky to Clinton to Obama to today. Civil society doesn't exist. Friendship doesn't exist. Family doesn't exist. Only permanent revolution. Have you seen what I posted on my Twitter feed with regards to family? Arthur is a children's cartoon. I think it's actually made with your money, PBS. My children used to watch Arthur 15 years ago, about a rodent-like creature that lived and had fun in his cartoon world. The new season of Arthur will have one of Arthur's teachers at school, a male teacher married to a fellow male rodent. Did you have any questions about there being a culture war, ladies and gentlemen? Did you have any doubt in your mind? This is a war for our culture, and that's why we exist here.
That's a little borderline anti-Semitic.
What?
A rodent-like figure marrying another rodent-like. Simple research would have revealed that it was an aardvark, but I'll go with vague rodent-like figure.
The culture war is on, folks. They have Arthur. We know he recruited Arthur.
Dad didn't like rodent-like figures either. Neither did his buddies at the certain secret society that shall remain nameless because of immigration papers.
Has anyone asked Steven Crowder how he feels about this? Because I know he has a past connection to Arthur, right?
Is that right?
That's true.
Yeah, he did a voice on the show. He's going to have to...
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's going to
That's
have
his only,
to
legit
repudiate
entertainment
Oh, I had no idea.
his association with this disgusting work of cultural Marxism.
Look, yes, indeed, boo. Yes, indeed, hiss.
Look, I love Robespierre as much as the next permanent revolutionary that doesn't believe in friendship and spits family in the face, but where are the motherfucking Muslim names? Mohammed, ever heard of him? Trying to replace the legal code with Sharia. And all I hear about is goddamn, Eurocentric. BuzzFeed top 10 reasons.
Let's just do this Jim Baker thing, and then we'll save some of the other stuff.
Arthur's a Shylock.
Ladies and gentlemen, exactly. Arthur wants his pound flesh. And he'll eat
The
it
red,
like a rodent.
the red. He asks the other rodent-like figure. The normal animals pay the red
Culture
to Arthur.
war.
And Arthur comes on with his rodent-like male husband and goes, the red.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a culture war going on, and it really is a fight for your dollars. Here is Lance Wallenow and Jim Baker on the Jim Baker Show, basically telling you we're living in prophetic times, ladies and gentlemen. What more would you need to face the oncoming apocalypse? Well, Jim has an idea.
How many of you have been praying all across America? How many of you have been praying? This coin is our point of contact. When I asked the Lord, why the coin? The Lord said, because when you take the coin, it's a point of contact. So your faith is being released with 1 million other believers to pray protection and peace and wisdom and counsel over the President of the United States and over his family. That's our point of contact. Every day when you see it, remember, God puts something in your hand that you have a role in. That's why we've got to pray, because they think we're crazy, but we're actually the sane ones.
Right. That's
and
right.
so we're praying, we're going to pray. The teaching that is here, this coin as a point of contact, this 24-karat gold-plated coin.
God has told them, charge $45 for that gold-plated coin.
God is a
It's such a great synthesis of Christianity and American capitalism. It's like, God.
It's so unbelievable. It's unbelievable how smoothly they can transition into, we need this. This symbol binds us together. We're all praying to this. It costs $45. It's gold-plated.
You losers.
But just
You're
the ability
go
to
take out a credit line, you
to deliver
swine.
that, exactly. If you want to have an extra connection to God, get 3. It's unbelievable.
One for your home, one for your car, and one for the office.
Exactly. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 281 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Anthony from College Station.
Anthony from College Station, what's on your mind?
Yes, a couple weeks ago, I called and asked about net neutrality, and y'all didn't think it'd become an issue for the primary.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll maybe become an issue for the general?
My guess is no.
Okay, that seems strange to me because it seems like a lot of the right is trying to cloak itself that they're really the ones for free speech, and it seems like net neutrality and how almost all Democrats are for it and no Republicans were is an obvious counter narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I just think that in this, era, it just doesn't have the same salience.
Net new socialism.
I mean, it's conceivable, but I think probably not.
It depends, I think, on how these look. If the companies wheel something out dramatically awful, like they did in Portugal, like what they'll do, is just sort of like add another surcharge on you, which is crap. But these companies already totally abuse customers anyways.
Even more pernicious.
No, I know, I understand, but I'm saying it will have to be. I think it's going to have to be something that's felt more viscerally to get to the top of the agenda. I agree, it's hugely important, but we're about to potentially invade Iran.
Believe me, if you go back, you can see how many shows we dedicated to net neutrality. I think it's hugely important. Hugely important.
Okay.
And this has been something I've been talking about for close to a decade. I think even some of the first videos I put out on this channel, one of them was about net neutrality. But
so do you think the right's narratives that they're really the real avatars for protecting free speech, that doesn't really hold that much weight either on their side?
No, I don't think they care. I mean, I don't think that they care that much. I think there's a sort of like a centrist, techie sensitivity to net neutrality. And I think the people who do care very, very deeply about it. But their power is more in the context of being able to push a somewhat amenable administration on that as opposed to one that's completely not amenable. And their power is far more in a legislative realm than in an electoral realm. There was something like 3 million plus comments sent to the FCC when Tom Wheeler was the chair. And it really pushed the Obama administration to maintain their promise, and Wheeler as well. And because 3 million comments, that's a big deal in terms of a legislative or a regulatory fight. In the context of an election, I mean, I'm sure you can find polling somewhere. What's the most important 5 or 10 issues for Democrats and Republicans? And I would imagine net neutrality may not even make the top 10. I mean, I'm not saying that it shouldn't, but
do you think it's like a broader issue, just kind of like administrative law and, the proper rule for the government regulating the market isn't going to be that big a deal either? Because this is kind of like the perfect encapsulation of how extreme Republicans have gotten.
I agree with you. I just don't know. Well, I think, Bernie will. I think you'll hear that from Bernie and Warren. I think you'll hear that particularly from Bernie and Warren. You will hear that. But you heard Joe Biden. You hear Pete Buttigieg. They're just talking about sort of broad emotional themes, which may be more effective. I don't know, but I appreciate the call, Anthony. I mean, believe me, I feel your pain. Not to just add one more of those bromides, I guess. Let's take one more phone call. I've got a lot of people holding for a long time, real long time. One more call, calling from a 774 area code. You are the final caller of the day. 774. 77.
Oh, hey. Yo, what's up? Sorry, I forgot my own. I think this is me.
Yeah.
This is Emmett from Worcester, Mass. Shout out from your hometown.
You got a bad
I just wanted
phone.
to call in. Wait, what? Yo, no, I'm actually still in bed. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I'd just like to talk about what is happening in the province of Xinjiang in China for a minute or so, because it's really horrible and it's barely even a part of the international discussion. So what's happening in China is this massive Belt and Road Initiative. It's a $1.4 trillion project to build a bunch of new infrastructure and stuff like that, and land routes and sea routes. And Xinjiang is right in western China. It's right in the middle of the belt. And there is an ethnic group there called the Uyghurs who, they're not ethnically Chinese. They are, I think they're Turkic, and they're Muslim, and they speak their own language. And ever since the 90s, China has been cracking down on them really hard, especially as a result of this Belt and Road Initiative in the past few years. And recently reports came out that as many as 1.5 million people might be in concentration camps there, which would be the largest internment of people since the Holocaust. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah, we just actually we played a clip about this the other day where the Pentagon, I think, says that the number is 3 million people. And Pompeo was saying, I think it's more around 1 million, and it's not concentration camps, it's a re-education camp. Which I'm not sure in what sort of universe you live in that actually people hear that and go, oh, it's just a re-education camp. I see. So it's sort of just like camp. It's like you're just going to learn how to do archery maybe and, play basketball or arts and crafts. I mean, there seems to be an adamant attempt by this administration, at least, and I'm not saying that would be different by any other ones, that to completely deny the existence of this.
Yeah, and I think especially it's in their economic interest, right, to deny the existence of it, because that province is like right kind of it's like a gateway basically from Central Asia. I know a caller earlier called about like Kazakhstan, and they're playing a role in it too in terms of sort of aiding and abetting China in this. And you know, I'm sort of, I don't know, I'm a big leftist, so I like to sort of be like, oh, it's freaking capitalism, man. But in this instance, it truly does seem that like global economics have played a huge role, because I know that in America, I forget where.
Dude, your phone is cutting out. I have to let you go. Appreciate the call though.
All right, peace.
Thanks. It was interesting, but he's got, I don't know what was going on with his phone there.
My ears perked up when he said capitalism.
There you go. Maybe he should be getting an iPhone instead. I love Sarah Palin. Sam, I do think more of the electorate is informed. More of the electorate is informed than ever before. For example, shout out to all the wonderful people of Kentucky for booing Matt Bevin last weekend at the Kentucky Derby. On the Rubin clip, I don't think government's going to call all health care. For example, what if I want to get cancer treatment based on the work of Dr. Sebi? I don't know. Jonathan Armstead, I did some Google research last night on the favorite films of 2020 presidential candidates. Some are weird. Biden said Chariots of Fire. That makes sense to me. Booker said Rocky. Mayor Pete said Gangs of New York. Julian Castro said Breakfast Club. Beto O'Rourke, total hipster, and said Blade Runner 2049.
Shut up, Beto.
No answer for Tulsi or Bernie, although I can imagine Red Dawn and Bulworth, respectively. Here's something odd. Andrew Yang said Shawshank Redemption, quote, because it's on TNT every 3 hours, as if we need more reason to dislike the guy. Local pizza. The problem with Jamie's theory that Bernie's doing well enough that they have to cave and toss the progressives a bone is that Biden is sitting on Trump levels of support and is going to run away with this. Please don't learn the wrong lesson from 2016 primaries that everyone else has. The polls weren't wrong. Jeb was the front runner with 13 points and exited at 10. Trump entered at 30 and won. Biden entered at 35.
I mean, I didn't say that he's doing well enough for that, because as evidenced by the fact that they haven't done that. But I also kind of came around to Sam's position, which is that Biden's doing well with the voters. So that's like always a give and take there.
Guitar's Car. Music suggestion for breaks. Call Me Drives a Nova from Ike Riley on Salesman and Racist for Jamie. Thanks, guys. Sam's Tinder profile. Hey, girl, swipe right to validate the algorithm, or swipe left, and it will make a new Tinder profile. I'm not sure I get it. Dr. Chaos MD. I was speaking with my mother, who's a baby boomer, and we started talking about politics. When it came to which Democratic candidates we would vote for, I told her I don't care who you vote for as long as it's not Joe Biden. There was a pause, and she asked, why not? Because we really need to beat Trump. I told her that there are many candidates who could beat Trump, and then went through as much of Biden's record as I could remember that moment. I think I may have dissuaded her from Biden, but then her next comments were about how interesting she found Pete Buttigieg. I immediately went into all the things that make Buttigieg problematic. She rebutted my point that not having any policy ideas on record is bad by claiming that Cory Booker came out with good policy proposals and was punished for it. At that point, I pivoted the conversation to non-political fare. I know this interaction is anecdotal, but I have this massive paranoia that the boomers are going to collapse our entire society and be the death of us. I hope I'm really wrong about that. Guess what? I got some bad news. Too late. Social Jewish Warrior. Looks like Mayor Pete is going on the Rubin Report because both are so interested in ideas. I don't know if that's confirmed.
Can't wait.
Can't say he wasn't warned. JJ Cool. Good to see MR finally giving Canadian politics the respect that much deserved. After all, we have a Medicare system for all for 40 plus years. In Saskatchewan, our public system was started in 1947 by Tommy Douglas. Yes. I know it might be a stretch to have another Canadian-focused interview, but Douglas's fight for health care in Saskatchewan is fascinating. When wealthy donor doctors went on strike, Douglas hired doctors from the UK. I feel like Guy Lawson came on the program once and talked about Tommy Douglas. We've got to get Guy back on here soon. JP Weaver, at the first sign of a cold, dissolve zinc lozenge in your mouth. Every few hours, your cold will go away and less severe. Try it. In fact, I do.
We are wall to wall with zinc at this studio.
There is a
folks.
lot of zinc
Sponsored
here,
by.
folks.
It's like a mine.
It is like a zinc mine. I do those lozenges. I do the zinc up your nose spray. I do the spray in the mouth. I do it all.
Careful.
Yep. Liberal communist. Yesterday, a libertarian socialist called in. He was asked what lineage his beliefs follow, but didn't fully answer. I'd say most of the prominent voice in the libertarian socialism today is Noam Chomsky. Of course, there have been plenty of anarchist, libertarian socialists throughout history. Chomsky is just the most important voice today. Geopolitical politics.
Read Chomsky, folks. He's good.
For the rape and incest exceptions, does the rapist need to be convicted first? Because as we know, those rapists often go unpunished and unconvinced, and those that are convicted need to go through court, which takes time, possibly longer than the pregnancy. Indeed. Gargelet, don't worry about Ben Shapiro, Sam. You're definitely what Grammy Hall would call a real Jew. Producer Lauren, to quote podcaster Randy Rhodes, love the fetus, hate the child, 29 after. Do you know if Senator Doug Jones supports Alabama abortion ban? I don't know. By the way, I've read that several transgender men have given birth, most recently in North Carolina. How would pro-lifers handle a trans man who wants an abortion because he was raped? Slash the fash.
Pro-lifers would not acknowledge the category of being a trans man.
Doe Link, the point is not whether it's human, but whether the government should be involved in decisions regarding women's reproductive organs. Indeed, 3 cats watch Top Gun. Abortion should be illegal because landlords already have too many rights over tenants and are too able to evict them. Jay Tingle. The big giveaway in Alabama came when the legislature denied protections to embryos stored for IVF because those cells are not inside women. Zinc dosing makes food taste bad for days after you stop. All right, 3 more of these. A Square. Sam, listen to the news on MR yesterday. This is all so much worse than we anticipated. You got my eye yesterday on women again, vessels of the state. The moon did fall into the lake, whatever. Mad King did not get tired of being POTUS, and now he knows better to stay or go to jail. Dems just don't get it. With this impeachment center power grabs by Republicans, the judiciary almost lost. Damn, more senators are trying to run for POTUS. Biden rising, looking good. These neocons aided by POTUS will try something versus Iran. What gives? Sorry, stream of consciousness. MV Scott, can't win a war with Iran, can't beat inept countries. How are we going to beat a country with an actual military and government? And the final IM of the day. Is anyone else getting a strong Stephen Miller vibe from Tom Cotton? Indeed. See you tomorrow.
I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess I'm with a choice